You find you don't focus on your own to-do list as much as you should. You get your client work done, but your own work is pushed aside because of it. Many suffer from this because we respect our clients and their deadlines and forget about us and our deadlines. A trick to resolving this is to treat yourself as a client. Welcome to the FAQ Business Podcast for business owners, covering 4 pillars: actionable education, inspiring leaders, businesses like you, and thought leadership, where we challenge your thinking. Hosted by myself, Jane Tweedy, I'm founder and lead trainer of FAQ Business Training, where we want to avoid you getting ripped off or ripping yourself off. We'll feature an amazing diversity of guests with lots to educate and inspire you. Let's jump into today's episode of the FAQ Business Podcast. Welcome back to the FAQ Business Podcast, and again you're with me solo, Jane Tweedy, host of the podcast and founder of FAQ Business Training. Your own work suffers, particularly when you have limited time to spend on it, which unfortunately has been the case for me recently, seeing as I seem to be suffering from long COVID, unfortunately, with a lot of fatigue. Fatigue is really challenging, and it's meaning I'm needing to sleep a lot more than normal, including entire days. So it is getting really frustrating. So I do need to reduce my workload, otherwise I'm actually affecting client work as well as my own work. But even in a normal scenario, we often give up a lot of our own work for our clients. One way of resolving this is to use time blocking techniques. So time blocking is where we go into our calendar and we block out time that clients can't book in so that we can maximize our time we spend on our businesses. The problem with time blocking is that often we'll cancel one of our time block appointments knowing that it's not a real client, knowing it's not someone we're doing work for, and therefore, if I drop my admin time, who cares? But the problem, of course, is you drop your admin time this week, you do the same next week, week 3, you've now got 3 weeks worth of admin to do. And that's when we get, oh gosh, admin. Whereas if we'd kept on top of it, it would not have been such a problem. A way to address this deleting of the time blocks is to treat yourself as a client. Some people will go as far as naming themselves a different name to actually put themselves in as a proper client, whereas some people will just simply put themselves in. But you've effectively got to put yourself in your CRM system. Treat yourself exactly as if you were a client. By treating yourself as a proper client, you may find that you treat yourself better. You'll give yourself the proper attention and work on yourself and your things when it deserves to be worked on. What type of work am I talking about here? Well, often it's the work that's working on our business rather than in our business. In our business is doing work like servicing our clients. Working on our business is working on our strategy, our planning, our implementation, getting things done for the business, making changes to the website, producing new documentation, considering new products, doing new research. I was actually talking to someone a few days ago about the whole idea of outsourcing, and the irony was that this discussion was actually with a virtual assistant, someone who understands how hard it is for clients to come on board if you don't have proper processes and practices in place. And the irony was she was getting her mum to come in and help her with some housework. And she said, oh, it was so frustrating. But the reason it was frustrating was because there was no process to it. She literally came and arrived, then she starts to go fold and clothes or whatever. And she's like, oh, well, where does this go? Or how do you do this? So the thing was, if she'd spent the time to set up the process in the first place, she probably would have had less of those questions. In fact, we've mentioned this before, a podcast we did about whether hiring or outsourcing was actually a help or a hindrance. And it came to the conclusion pretty much, it is nearly always a hindrance when we first start doing it. But we've got to get through that. We've got to get through to the other side, because when we get through to the other side, it definitely becomes a help. particularly if our intention is to grow our business. We cannot grow our business if we're the only one working in it and on it. If you're holding off things like outsourcing or hiring because you don't have the time to sort out your processes, clean up your automations and sort that kind of thing out, you really need to take note of this. You really do need to treat yourself as a client and treat yourself with more respect and more value. Because the key is, if you don't value yourself, why is anyone else going to do it for you? There is a thing called the Eisenhower Matrix, which is a method of time management. It's a 4-quadrant system, and it looks at what's urgent and important. Quadrant 1 is urgent and important. Things like meetings, okay, they're urgent. If you don't go to that meeting that day, it ain't happening, right? You've missed out on the meeting or the session, the conference or whatever. So there'll always be stuff that's urgent and important. What we've got to make sure we're avoiding doing is moving stuff from the category that was important but not urgent into urgent because we haven't done it. Things like not doing our tax return on time. That suddenly is going to move into the urgent category. So what we kind of find is when we're getting behind and not concentrating on doing enough for ourselves, we tend to find that we end up with more and more stuff moving into quadrant 1. It's urgent and important, whereas we should be spending the bulk of our time in quadrant 2. Important, but not urgent. That includes all of our planning, all of our activities to grow our business, everything like that fits in that category. And like I said, it becomes urgent when suddenly a deadline approaches. Whereas if we'd done it when it was in quadrant 2, it would have stayed there. Quadrant 3, by the way, is urgent but not important. In other words, it's probably somebody else's agenda. Somebody's sending you an email, phoning you up. Answering the phone becomes urgent, but often the phone calls are not actually urgent for us. They might be urgent for them, but really they've got nothing to do with us. So we want to minimize that quadrant. Quadrant 4 is not urgent and not important. That quadrant is the waste of time quadrant and is the one that we should minimize to 0 as much as possible. Now, there is a difference here though, and this is where some people get muddled up. For instance, they might treat Netflix binging as a quadrant 4 item. But if you need to binge watch a Netflix series every Sunday and that's your way of chilling out and relaxing, then that's actually quadrant 2. It's important. It's an important thing for you to do to unwind. If, however, it's time wasting and you were meant to be doing something else and you had every intention of doing something else, that's a quadrant 4 activity. It wasn't urgent and it wasn't important. You shouldn't have been doing it. So our focus in our lives should be mainly on quadrant 2. What is important to us, particularly things that are going to help us achieve our goals, but not urgent because there's no rush to them at the moment. There will become a rush if we leave them behind. So if we focus on what we should more, what we will understand is that we will spend a lot more time in that quadrant 2. We will realize that we need to give ourselves time to work on our businesses as well as in them to make sure that we are really getting ahead. So what is important are things like achieving our goals. And we can only achieve our goals if we actually give ourselves time to focus on them and do the work and develop a method to actually achieve them. So by treating ourselves as a client, we can actually get to that point of achieving our goals. We respect ourselves a lot more. Treating yourself with a higher level of respect will hopefully have a flow-on effect that if you respect yourself, then maybe others will respect you more too. In fact, I had a client that did this recently. She really stuck by her pricing. And by sticking by her pricing, her client actually respected her more and gave her more work to do, even though the price was against them. But it was because she showed that respect for herself and her value for herself that they thought, God, you must be worth it then. They gave her a chance and they decided she was worth it. So treat yourself with the importance that you deserve. Treat yourself as a client and treat yourself with the same respect as you do with clients. So any activity that you consider important for a client then becomes important for you too. And you will remember that we had some recent episodes about working while sick, etc. And I also need to remember to give myself that time to recover from being sick when it's taking longer than I expected to. When I'm pushing myself too far, I'm not only just failing me, but I am also failing my clients too. So that's it from me today. A short, sharp episode just to get things done and out there. I'm Jane Tweedy. I'm with the FAQ Business Podcast, and I hope to catch you again soon when hopefully we'll be well enough to get back to our normal schedule and get into recording with some great guests that we have lined up. Catch you soon. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to today's episode of the FAQ Business Podcast. Available on all good podcast services. You can subscribe today via faqbusinesspodcast.com.au or directly on Apple iTunes, iHeartRadio, or Spotify. Subscribe, follow, share, and where able, review our podcast or leave us a comment on either YouTube or our blog page. Thanks for helping us to help you, the small to medium businesses who are growing and want to make a difference. Look forward to connecting with you again on the next episode of the FAQ Business Podcast.